Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. One thing I like to do early in the league is give a bit of a roundup as to exactly how the league meta is shaking out, what builds are overperforming, what builds are underperforming, and so on and so forth. Well, it's the 18th day of the league, normally I do it a little bit earlier than this, but hey, here it is. This is going to be looking at Ascendancy choices, defensive archetypes, primary skills, and also separating out some of those skills that have multiple ways of scaling the damage on them. Quick recap of the methodology in case you haven't seen one of the previous league versions of this video. Grinding Your Games published the ladder. This is a list of the top 15,000 players by XP, as well as the top 15,000 players by Delve Solo Depth. Now these overlap quite a lot with each other, so it's not a list of 30,000 players. In practice, it's generally a list of about 20,000. Combine this gives you a bit of an overview as to what's the most successful build archetypes. Now this data is a bit difficult to parse by itself, but the website POE.ninja scrapes this data and converts it into a usable form. It also saves it on a daily basis early in the league and on a weekly basis through the middle and end of a league, and also allows you to go and check the previous league as well. Now you can check this data for the core game mode, so this is softcore trade enabled non-ruthless, or you can check it with 1, 2, or 3 of the hard mode rule sets available. So you can check solo self-found, you can check hardcore, you can check ruthless, or any combination thereof. As always, harder game modes constrain builds quite a lot. One thing that's important to note is that there's a small percentage of people who will mess around with their builds for a laugh, especially once they're personally done with the league. And that's why there are 2 unascended shadows currently on the ladder, and you will see those when we have a look at the Ascendancy breakdown. Here's our Ascendancy spread with those 2 poor shadows sitting in the bottom right as the least popular Ascendancy. We have Elementalist, Occultist, Deadeye, Saboteur, and Juggernaut at the top. Then at the bottom end, we have the Slayer, the Assassin, the Guardian, the Chieftain, and the Gladiator. Now, it's worth noting that almost all of the Ascendancies are the best build for something, and for something that is genuinely playable. For example, Slayer's the 5th least popular Ascendancy at the moment, but it is generally considered the best build if you want to play a Cyclone Shockwave character, and those are definitely seeing some success. And Slayer's not super versatile at the moment, so some people do play it because they love the build, but it's not like it's tearing up the ladder or anything. This does fall off a bit for the 4 least popular Ascendancies though, the Assassin, the Guardian, the Chieftain, and the Gladiator. All of them do have their fans, but none of them are performing particularly well at the moment, and it might be something that's worth a little bit of a look at power-wise for GGG before the next league. Anyways, this currently is rivaling 3.19 as the most diverse spread ever. And one of the key things here is that GGG haven't left any extreme top-end power outliers available. One of the key reasons for this is that in the past, when there's been really poor build diversity for a league, it's been because the top builds of that league have been so strong, so overwhelmingly more powerful than everything else, that even people that don't like that build tend to re-roll to it, or at least feel some pressure to. And of course, the people who do that end up being the ones that make up the majority of the ladder. At the moment, whilst some Ascendancies are better, and whilst the north end of the passive tree in general is quite a bit better than the rest of it, it's not much better. And that means that people who would rather play a champion, who would have more fun if they're playing a champion, aren't feeling, I kind of need to play an Elementalist this league because everything else is so much worse. Instead, they're feeling, oh, okay, my champion's a little bit worse than an Elementalist would be, but at least it's going to be fun to play, and it's only a few % worse. Now, Trickster and Juggernaut have swapped in popularity since last league. In 3.19, there was an overhaul of both of these Ascendancies, and when this overhaul happened, Trickster was the more popular early on. This time, people have warmed up to the Juggernaut, whereas the Trickster is just not shiny and new. Trickster is performing fine without being great, but one of the key things for Juggernaut is that there's an outstanding build guide to Righteous Fire that's been put out by content creator Pox, and in the past, Pox has advocated playing the build as an Inquisitor. This league, after the 319 buffs to the Juggernaut and a small nerf to the Inquisitor in 320, he has now come to the conclusion that the Juggernaut is the superior option, and a lot of people have chosen to follow his wisdom. So really, that's a lot of people churning away from the Inquisitor and into the Juggernaut, but still playing the same build. It is worth saying that the Righteous Fire Inquisitor is still a fine build if you want to play it. So Gladiator, Assassin, Guardian, and Chieftain are just the low performers in trade softcore at the moment, and none of them are performing great in the harder game settings either. If you have both the Ruthless rule set and the Hardcore rule set in, you start to see better performances from the Guardian and the Chieftain, and that applies whether the solo self-found rule set is applied or not. But this is not really a massive increase, it's just a modest one that you do notice, but that doesn't mean that these Ascendancies are particularly good there. They go from being dumpster tier in softcore trade-enabled non-ruthless to being something that is more middling tier in the ruthless, hardcore, and either solo self-found or trade settings. So So for that reason, those Ascendancies are in a fairly bad place overall. Okay, so next I want to talk about defensive styles. Determination, Defiance Banner, and Molten Shell are just so powerful that almost every very high level character uses them all. This has been the case every league since 3.16 when they were buffed into the stratosphere. This is true even in softcore, it's even more true in hardcore. Defiance Banner use has been down the last 2 leagues since it was nerfed in 3.19, but it is still one of the top 10 active skills. It's worth saying that this was a crushing nerf. This skill had its stats halved, and is still in the 10 most used skills in the game. Divine Shield and Aegis Aurora are incredibly popular amongst players that can afford this setup, and whilst Grace is popular, especially with Ghost Dance, it is definitely not to the same extent as Determination, Defiance Banner, and Molten Shell. Now, if you've watched these videos in the past, you'll know that this is pretty much exactly what was said last time. That's because it's pretty much exactly the same situation now. We've had no real changes in defensive styles. Everyone is settling into the things that are known overperformers because they simply eclipse everything else. Very late league, you do start seeing more options open up. You start seeing more use of things like Law Weave with Transcendence, but for now, it is the standard Determination, Defiance Banner, Molten Shell setup. And in terms of other things with defenses, we've seen a continuation of the 3.16 era shift away from big effective life pools, the ones that you needed to soak up one-shots or potential one-shots in the 3.13, 3.14, 3.15 era of the game, and towards more of a mitigation focus. Endurance charges on non-juggernauts are falling back in popularity. These had a real spike in popularity last league, and I suspect that may have been due to the Grand Spectrum overhaul, and with Grand Spectrum no longer being as shiny and new, I think less people are going out of their way to acquire these powerful jewels. Endurance charge Grand Spectrums, though, are still a very powerful defensive option for non-budget builds, and on a lower budget, we're seeing Enduring Composure used on cluster jewels quite a bit as well. One of these major sources of endurance charges appears to be on about 7% of very high-level characters. This is down from 11% in 3.19. Shields are pretty much ubiquitous. 64% of very high-level players are equipping a shield currently. Of the remaining players, 18% are equipping a bow, 7% a staff, and then dual wield and non-staff two-handed fighting add up to only 11%. This is because GGG buffed substantially the power level of shields quite a while ago, and they've just made shields so good that people feel compelled to use them, whether they're interested in wearing one or not. So let's take a look at the skills people are using as their primary damage dealing skills against enemies. Now, this is the highest skill diversity league that we've ever seen. There's been a tendency in the last couple of years, and it really started with 3.14, to see more and more skill diversity over time. Partly this is GGG just nerfing the extreme outliers a bit more aggressively. With the exception of Seismic Trap, GGG nerfs skills that deserve it fairly thoroughly in most cases. Now, whilst this can sometimes mean that a skill goes from S tier to D tier straight away, at least we're not seeing a situation where a skill is S tier 5 leagues in a row. There have been exceptions, but these exceptions are rarer than they used to be, especially around the 2019 to 2020 era of the game, where there are a number of skills that would be 25% of the meta by themselves, and then the next league they'd be slightly nerfed and they'd come back and be 30% of the meta. But I think one of the other major factors is the rise of Rog as a powerful crafting option. One of the things that Rog does is he makes very, very good gear that may be for off-meta builds. So someone will make a 6 times T1 item with Rog or something very close to it and go, you know what, that is absolutely useless to my build. That is absolutely useless to anything I'm even considering playing, but it's absolutely perfect for someone else. I'm going to list it for sale at a modest price, much lower than something with comparable roles that was for a meta build would be. And then someone that's coming along looking for their next build is going to think, oh, I can pick up that 6 Divine Orb item that's so much better than I could ever hope to craft myself. I think that that's one of the things that's caused us to start seeing more and more build diversity in recent leagues. Rog being really good, and additionally GGG being fairly good at nerfing the extreme outlier builds. It does need to be said though, we're going to be talking about builds that exist right now, and the characters are level 98 plus right now. Arguably one of the league's strongest builds is Poison Summon Raging Spirits, and this is something that only really became popular in the last few days after Bala Mage made an excellent guide to it. And I expect that skill to increase in popularity by a lot, and essentially it may end up replacing Righteous Fire/Fire Trap as the top skill of the league. Now, the Sanctum mechanics also force players who want to seriously engage with them to have a Sanctum optimized character. Spell Totem builds that freeze around corners via various things. A lot of players are leveling these builds. They may not be what they really want to play. Maybe what they really want to play is something else, but they're going and running a bunch of Sanctum runs with these Sanctum optimized characters as well. So do keep that in mind. That's something that really changes the overall texture of this league meta. Top 5 performers on level 98 plus characters. In at number 1, we have Righteous Fire, which is combined with Fire Trap. So Fire Trap provides single target burst damage. Righteous Fire just kills all of the trash around. This build is usually played on a Juggernaut now, often played on an Inquisitor. Both are excellent builds, and there is a great guide by Pox to both of them. Spark is next, but Spark is actually two very different builds. There is a critical strike scaling one that is an Inquisitor build, and there is an occultist poison build for Spark as well. Both of these are very good. They're very different to each other, and I'm just bunching them together, and that puts Spark as the number 2 skill of the league. But you may well decide that actually the crit Spark is about skill number 5 this league, and the poison version is about skill number 8. And if you want to make that decision, then that is going to push Val Venom Gaia from position 3 up to position 2. Val Venom Gaia is almost universally played on a Deadeye, and Venom Gaia was already very good before this league. Val Venom Gaia simply made it much better. Explosive Arrow Ballista comes in at position 4. This is usually played as an Elementalist, but it's a versatile setup, and it can be played very well on a champion, and also can be played on other Ascendancies entirely. And finally, we've got something that is very much a one Ascendancy build, and that is Ethereal Knives Ignite as an Elementalist. This has been performing very, very well and has been rocketing people up the XP charts. Honorable mentions for skills, Cold Tornado Shot Deadeye, which is probably the single best build for high budget Sanctum runs. Next, we have two forms of Cast on Critical Strike Cyclone. So in both cases, Cyclone is the trigger skill, but in the first case, you have Forbidden Right as a payload and you play it as an Occultist, and in the second case, you have Ice Spear as the payload and you play it as an Inquisitor. You aren't absolutely set on going these particular payloads. These are just the two that have been performing slightly better than other choices. Next, we have Poison Seismic Trap Saboteur. This is the best boss killer under about 2000 Chaos and is very, very strong at just deleting bosses, even all of the way up to the top Uber bosses. Shockwave Cyclone Slayer is an honorable mention. This is something that's been a solid but unspectacular performer for many, many leagues. Hexblast Mines comes next, and this is usually played as a Saboteur. Interesting thing here, there was a lot of interest in playing Hexblast in conjunction with traps before this league started. However, there was a very poorly communicated change to the way that Hex on hit setups work, and ultimately this ended up causing the trap versions of Hexblast to pretty much be useless. The people who are playing those builds have generally pivoted to Hexblast Mines instead, which do work a lot better. Our next honorable mention goes to an Ignite skill you might not have thought of, and that is Vortex. Vortex just has tremendous initial hit damage. Even though most people, when they think of Vortex, they think, oh, that's for cold damage over time, the actual initial hit damage on Vortex is extremely high too. And with an Elementalist, your non-fire damage can ignite and also can be scaled up really high. Vortex Ignite Elementalist is a great build, and there is a fantastic guide to it by content creator Rutu. Finally, we have the Armor Aura Stackers build, which is something that's actually better represented when we narrow to level 100 only. This tends to be played as a champion using Vile Smite, although that's not the only way that you can build it. And the key thing that makes these things stand out is that these builds run multiple copies of the Cluster Jewel exclusive notable Introspection. This causes auras from your skills to have 10% increased effect on you. Introspection boosts the effect of your Grace, your Determination, and your Defiance banner. This then, in conjunction with Iron Reflexes, causes you to get a staggering amount of armor on your character, and then with Replica Dreamfeather, you start doing some truly horrifying amounts of damage. If we look just at the highest performers, which means we restrict only to those characters that have already reached level 100, the pattern looks very similar at this point, except for a couple of things. The most notable thing is that Deadeyes are better represented when you only look at level 100s, and the second most notable thing is that Aura Stacker builds do better at level 100 as well. There's a couple of potential reasons for this, but I think one of the main ones is that Deadeyes are the best builds for Legion 5-ways. And so people who are determined to hit level 100 may actually roll a Deadeye solely to abuse Legion 5-ways in order to get themselves to level 100 and make a whole bunch of currency out of carrying other people with them. And that then means that those people have an extra Deadeye that's level 100. And once you're already level 100, why not make another one? Aura Stackers are very, very survivable once they get going. And that, I think, is one of the reasons that they do so well at getting through the very significant barrier that is level 98 and 99 in order to push to 100. Anyways, that is the meta for the Sanctum League when not considering any hard modes on day 18. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results.